somewhere in Dreamland.
It looked like the complexion of a dead person in a casket.
Random memories of waking up in the night, knowing I'm not alone in the room.
We have 3 cities that all claim to be the UFO capital of the entire world.
So when she turned on the kitchen light, it stopped walking.
My parents told me these things didn't exist.
They're a little more ominous, creepy, scary, and the question is there, what is this thing?
Hovering just inches from the window was literally is what you'd imagine a grave to be.
Never seen anything like this in my life.
I'm still left with more questions than answers.
Welcome back, dreamers. If you've had an encounter, please contact me at somedreamland@gmail.com, find me on social media at somedreamland podcast, or check out the show's new website, dreamlandpodcast.weebly.com. If you're enjoying the show, please help it grow by subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing this episode with friends, family, and social media. Tonight, my guest is Joshua Cutchin. Joshua is the author of 5 books, including 2 of my favorites, Thieves in the Night and Where the Footprints End. Along with this, Josh is a folklore theologian and a paranormal researcher whose work and theories have, in my opinion, breathed a whole new life into the somewhat dormant field of the paranormal with his outside-of-the-box thinking. So without further ado, grab your blanket, turn down the lights, get comfy, and let's fade away into
Dreamland.
All right, Josh. Well, I'm super excited to talk with you, man. So,
All right, yeah.
No. I enjoy it. We can banter all you want, man. So, how many books exactly have you written?
Depends on how you want to qualify them, I guess. I have written 3 solo books. I have contributed essays to 2 essay collections, and then Timothy and I have written the 2 Where the Footprints End books. I have forthcoming, at some point, a collection of essays that I am contributor to and editor on fairy films, and then I am pretty much committed to the fact that my next project that I'm currently working on is going to be 2 books as well. I don't want to get known as like the 2-book guy, but given the subject matter and given how long it is already, and I have so much still left to say, I think it'll be a little bit intimidating. It'll look like Les Miserables or something if I hand it over to people in the current form in 1 book. So we'll split that one in 2. So right now, counting the Bigfoot books and not counting the essays, 5 books. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, man.
Yeah, I try to stay on point. I try to treat it kind of like a day job, even though it didn't really start paying much of anything until now. And just putting in the time. But part of it's, I'm a workaholic in that respect. But yeah, I just, Trojan Feast came out in May of 2015. So yeah, it's been a busy 6 years for sure.
Yeah, I really, really like your style of writing. I think that sometimes I think that you suck me in, and you're like, I'm like, this guy is using these words in this terminology that I'm not getting, but then you explain it all, and I'm like, oh, okay. Now I feel a little bit smarter. I feel a little bit more educated.
Well, I try to, part of my guiding ethos is that I like to write every book so that it could be appreciated by someone who's been in the field for 20 years or someone who just picked it up, and thinking to myself, how would my mom and dad react to what I'm writing, in terms of understanding and whatnot. So yeah, I do have a tendency, I think, to lean into pretentiousness. I kind of thrived in the academic landscape of college, even though I have criticisms to the moon and back about that, that culture. I do thrive in sort of that academic sort of world. So I try to temper that with, okay, either explain your words or, do sort of what Shakespeare did, and not comparing myself to Shakespeare, but if you ever watch a Shakespearean play for the first 15 minutes, you kind of half understand what's being said, and then you fall into this cadence, and it's just miraculous. It all opens up to you, and you can understand these things just through not only through the acting, but just through the gist of the sentences. And I think that sometimes you have to kind of do that. Even if they don't understand this word, they'll understand the thrust of what's being conveyed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you just explained that pretty well, your style of writing. So,
well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, to me, you are somewhat of a folklore theologian. And I kind of want to know what started your fascination in folklore and the paranormal.
That's a really charming way of putting it. I don't think I've ever heard it put that way before. Yeah, because, I talk to people about what I do, and I don't want to just say that I write books about UFOs and Bigfoot and stuff, because I do think that sort of sells, sounds like I'm full of myself, but I do think it sells the perspective short that I'm from where I'm coming from. Because it really is that comparative folklore aspect. And where it came from, I kind of don't know. Timothy said something about a friend of his who said, I follow the things that hum, and, this or that hums. And for some reason, the fairy thing hummed. I was a monster kid growing up. I was all about watching Predator and Alien and anything that was a creature feature, right? I think the first film I ever saw was the old 1933 King Kong, right? So I'm enamored with monsters, and so I was into the Bigfoot thing. I was kind of a little bit into the UFO thing, but I didn't really have any sort of concept of anything besides the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which, even at that time, not being involved in these topics just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Also, I'll be honest, I was deathly afraid of alien abductions, crapping my pants, scared of alien abductions, which is ironic because I'm surrounded now by pictures of gray aliens. But there was a point where I couldn't even look at a picture of a gray, Something about that whole idea just really was chilling for me. So I sort of have had this interest in the paranormal that I've been nursing, and it was back in 2012. I had a commute. An hour to work and an hour back every day. I started listening to paranormal podcasts, and I got introduced to some alternative ideas about the extraterrestrial hypothesis, specifically the consciousness angle. And that was, not only did it sort of alleviate that fear, because there's, the implication that you have a foot in the door in terms of being sovereign and in terms of being able to defend yourself. But also, it seemed a lot more plausible to me and a lot more interesting. And so I was really I was doing this commute and just filling my head with all this stuff. And for some reason, that whole thing about fairy folklore had stuck in my head, that if you eat, food from fairyland, you're stuck in fairyland forever. And then I remember I had a set of circumstances where I got, as a gift, from using an Amazon gift card, I got J. Robert Alley's Raincoat Sasquatch, and in it says that if you take food from the Bequas, which is the version of Bigfoot among some Alaskan tribes, their version of Bigfoot. If you take food from the Bequas, you're trapped with them forever. And I'm like, that's just like fairyland. Someone should write a book about that. And then I just sat around for a while, and Nick Redfern didn't do anything, so I'm like, I guess it's me. And then that's how A Trojan Feast was born. I wrote it completely on spec, and I will forever be grateful to the fact that Micah Hanks and the guys at Mysterious Universe, love them or hate them nowadays, they gave me a chance and they gave me a platform to talk about it. That sort of allowed some new stories to come my way, and sort of got the attention of some other people, and I was able to send a manuscript off to Patrick Huige at Anomalous Books, who is just a fantastic human being that I don't talk about Patrick enough, but he's been such a champion of mine and a supporter of mine. And Patrick said, he said, okay, I'll look at it. We reject like 80 to 90% of the stuff that gets sent our way. And he came back and said it was one of the cleanest manuscripts he'd ever seen. And that started a relationship that we've had for 5+ years now.
Awesome. It's almost like it's meant to be, huh?
Yeah, and Patrick it's one of those surreal things, because like in middle school, I had a book of that Patrick co-authored with Lauren Coleman, like sitting on my shelf, like, and here I am, working with him. Same thing when I got some reviews of some of my books by Jerome Clark. Like Jerome Clark's The Unexplained was this book that I just tore apart in middle school. Just like my mom, like I still have the copy at my folks' place today, but my mom like had to repair the cover with packing tape and all that sort of thing. And he, and Jerry Clark is saying kind of things about my book. I mean, it's the most surreal thing, and I will forever be grateful to the reception that my work has gotten. I have found it to be, despite all of its infighting, a pretty darn welcoming community. Timothy and I have talked about the fact that your average Fortean, I'm going to use that as an umbrella term, but your average Fortean or someone who's into the unexplained is heaps nicer than your average musician. It's just, there's a lot of backbiting and infighting and people who hate their lives with musicians. And it's been a wonderful community, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And I'm incredibly grateful that it's been so well received. We'll see after this next book. People might turn around and hate me, but we'll see.
Well, I'll tell you, I have not read A Trojan Feast yet. It is on my list. I read Thieves in the Night. Blew my mind, man. The stuff you put together in that book just blew me away. Like, I mean, I'm sold. I'm with you on it.
Well, I appreciate it. That book was something that I hadn't had a chance to really do. I had Trojan Feast came out and it was well received. I look back on it now with 6 years more knowledge, and I see all the warts on it, but people still talk kindly about it. The second book is kind of my low-key favorite, The Brimstone Deceit, about smells in the paranormal, but like it's nobody reads that book. I barely got to write about the Fey Folk in The Brimstone Deceit. And so I said to myself, can I write something that's scarier and also brings back in the Fey Folk, and also, I'm all about challenging my conceptions of these phenomena. And what I mean by that is, I'm convinced that there is a one-to-one comparison to be made between fairy folklore and the alien abduction experience. But there are some weird things with alien abductions that you have to answer for if you're going to take that stance. And so Thieves in the Night was sort of trying to reconcile all these stories of alien hybrids and all that with the older fairy folklore. And I'm kind of doing something the same with this new project that I'm working on about death in the paranormal, because one of the things that I have found myself over the years really recoiling from is people who talk about pre-birth memories of them with gray aliens, or gray aliens in reincarnation, or my soul is a gray alien and stuff. And it's been like, ugh, I can't stand that stuff. But I perceive that as a flaw in my thinking, so I'm like, okay, I've got to find a way to reconcile this, because I'm definitely of the opinion that we should be throwing out very few of these stories, honestly, because stories are where Forteans sort of have their bread and butter, and there are a lot of honest people that I've met who've said some crazy things, and they are sober, and they are kind, and they are direct, and they, by all appearances, are sane, and are telling me these crazy things, and it's up to me to honestly try to reconcile that.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, first I want to say I appreciate that about you, that you're going back and trying to recoil and figure things out and see how things fit. I really think that you are, and this is not just me kissing your ass, man, because you're on my show, but I really feel like you are one of those minds in this community that are thinking way different than everybody else. I look at you like a mad scientist, okay? No, seriously, like you're bringing up these things that no one else, maybe they've thought of, maybe they've just pitched them away, but you're grabbing a hold of them and you're finding things to back them up and you're putting them together and you're going, here's what I found. This is, you don't so much say this is what I think, but you say, here's the evidence. These fit. This is a puzzle. Right. And I appreciate that, man, because I don't feel like enough people are doing that.
Yeah, one thing that I made it a point to do a long time ago, and I don't think anyone's ever really remarked on this, but with the exception of the final chapter of A Trojan Feast, I don't use the word I in any of my writing. You know, I say, here's the evidence, here's this, that, the other, but I try to take myself out of it because I feel like, you know, these things should stand on their own. And it really means a lot that you said that, because even though there has been a lot of warm reception, with a lot of my work, I do feel sometimes kind of homeless, you know?
Yeah.
It seems like I think that might be sort of the curse of someone who's looking at this stuff comparatively, but like I don't really feel like I fit into any one of these communities, and not in like a too cool for school kind of way. Just like I can only meet a lot of these people in their various disciplines halfway if they're towing the party line, you know, which is, you know, Bigfoot's a monkey and UFOs are aliens and fairies are little nature spirits, and I don't really agree with any of that. I'm sitting in the middle of it. So the fact that you would say that really does warm my heart. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Hey, look, stay right where you're at, because I think you're in the right lane. I think that so many people, and what I mean by the right lane is you aren't even in a lane, and that's what I like about you. Like, because so many people do stay right in their lane, but that lane seems to blind them, and you're not blinded by that. You are sucking in all this information and researching and doing all this stuff, and you're, as far as I'm concerned, you're blowing most of them out of their lane, because I feel like as a researcher, and I'm not a researcher, but I've talked to plenty of researchers. I've talked to plenty of Bigfoot people, alien abductees. I've talked to plenty of people like that. And the way I feel is that you are thinking differently than everybody. And researchers, for instance, if you're sitting there telling me that you're a professional researcher, but Bigfoot is a living, breathing, flesh and blood creature, but you aren't looking at anything else that Bigfoot can be doing, or Bigfoot can be, then you aren't doing your job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I've probably picked up from Greg Bishop, is that, if you come to me 6 months from now, a year from now, and my opinions haven't changed somehow, I think that you're going backwards, you know? I do think that there is something to be said for, like, it's almost like endless growth in capitalism, right? Endless progressive, endless progress. It's kind of like something you shouldn't have an expectation for, but at the same time, like, I like that my opinion has changed. Like, some of the stuff that I've written about, I have completely different opinions on now. But I think that's the sign of someone who's, always trying to better themselves, I guess. Maybe it's that classically trained musician background of mine or something, but sitting for 3 or 4 hours in the practice room. But no, I really appreciate it, and I kind of get bashful and awkward when people say nice things. So.
No, it's all good, man. So let's talk about where the footprints end for a minute, or for a little bit, because I absolutely am devouring the first book. I cheated and started reading the second book just because I knew I was going to talk to you and I wanted to try to get caught up. But I am loving both of them so far. So when you were writing this book, when you first started writing this book, you and Timothy, what were your hopes going into the writing of it? Like, did you, what were your hopes when you started writing it? And did those hopes and outlooks change during the writing process or even after you finished it?
Well, all the credit for the origin of this project really has to go to Timothy, because I had just learned that my wife was pregnant, and I was saying to myself, okay, well, this sounds like a good time to not try to work on another project. And he came to me and said, I think we should write. He kind of was thinking about like an encyclopedia or a dictionary of like weird Bigfoot. And we kicked the idea around, and I said, okay, I'll do it. So I ended up writing the whole thing, I think, in like, my half, in like 3 months or something. Wow. It was just so accelerated. And I guess it's because I was kind of writing it in the back of my head, for years. Yeah. I guess that's where it comes from. But I can't really remember how we decided upon the sort of two-hander essays back and forth, but I think the goal was to be, what's the phrase? Comprehensive but not exhaustive, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Because, honestly, there's a third book that could be written out there, and before anybody asks, we're not going to do it. Because, I think that, I know that there are other pairs of paranormal authors, and I can't remember if this was publicly said or it was in the behind the scenes on one of the interviews, but there are other pairs of authors who've published books together, and it's not uncommon for the relationship to become a little strained, which is not, to say that Timothy and I are on the outs or anything. We still text each other regularly, and like Timothy has said that he'd raise my kids if something happened to me and my wife. So, we're still close, but it's like rooming with someone, even if you're best friends, you end up kind of getting in those positions. So, he said, let's do this weird Bigfoot book, and let's try to tackle as many things as we can. I'm like, okay, and it just all sort of grew organically from there. And by organically, I mean even up to the fact that one half is sort of folklore and the other half is evidence. Like, that was kind of an arbitrary cut that we made, but it was right. It turned out to be right down the middle, and it's roughly kind of the two topics of the individual books.
Yeah, man. I think that what you were doing and what you're doing individually with books like Thieves in the Night and what you guys did together on these two books, they really bring a fresh twist on something that's very redundant. I mean, the paranormal field is a very redundant field. Not much changes in it, like ghost hunters go and chase ghosts, and they use their, EVPs, and they catch EVPs, and they use their K2 meters, and not much changes other than technology. But what you guys have done and what you do is just put a whole new twist on it for me. And I appreciate that.
Well, I know it's a bit trite to say, but we do stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, there are some people like, Stan Gordon, for instance, who have been teasing out this connection for a while. And I don't know why this struck such a nerve. People like Stan were beating this drum for a long time. Heck, Ann Slayton, Al Berry were beating it back in the 70s, that there was a paranormal angle to Bigfoot. But Timothy and I have been overwhelmed by the amount of attention this whole project's gotten. I guess like some of the old guard cryptozoologists are just tired of holding back the tide. It's kind of what I think sometimes. I just read something snarky from someone today that was like, "Oh, it's never meet your heroes." But it's I think that it's partially that. I also think that the Bigfoot community is kind of going through something that the UFO community went through probably started going through about 10, 15 years ago, which has also increased even since I've been involved, which is, 6 years, right? But even since I've been involved, I've been seeing like people coming out and talking more about the strange synchronicities and the strange paranormal aspects of the UFO phenomena, even in the short amount of time that I've been here. And that's happening, sure enough, in the last year or two, the paranormal stuff with Bigfoot has been really, really coming out. They're talking about, like, I would be surprised if literally every Bigfoot researcher who is honest doesn't have a story about strange lights in the woods. Oh, we were on we were looking for Bigfoot and we didn't see anything that trip. We saw something the trip before and the trip after, but all we saw on that trip were these strange lights in the woods, stuff like that. which, some people will say, oh, well, that doesn't mean that they're connected to Bigfoot. But as Timothy says, and I really love this point, he says, it's strange enough to see, Bigfoot, and it's strange enough to see a UFO, or in this case, ghost lights. But it's should be orders of magnitude stranger to see both at the same time or both in the same proximity. And yeah, I think that speaks to there being something related between these phenomena.
Yeah, I would agree. So the first story in Where the Footprints End was fantastic. And you guys said it was the quintessential Bigfoot high strangeness case. Could you kind of recap that story and tell my audience a little bit about what they can expect if they picked your book up?
Yeah, I mean, it combines so many aspects of this. There was a case on October 25th, 1973 in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, just south of Uniontown. And about 15 people saw this large glowing UFO in the sky. And it was like orangish or red, and it hovered sort of down towards this farm. And the primary witness, there were, again, multiple people who saw this, but the primary witness actually went up to where this thing had apparently landed. And he goes up there and he sees this big orange ball. They said it was about the size of a barn. And they just were watching this, and they grabbed their guns, and they had tracer rounds in them. And they get out and they can hear this whirring sound. And they also heard the sound of something like babies crying or kids yelling. So as they're looking at the UFO in the distance, they see something coming along the fence line. And it was these Bigfoot, tall, and walking really slowly and deliberately. And they took some shots at them. And they said that whenever they would shoot them, it would sound like dropping something in the water, which is a wonderfully odd little detail. But they also were sort of swatting away at the tracer rounds, if memory serves. Eyes were glowing, and they were basically Bigfoot. They were tall, and they were covered in hair. And they eventually, this happens, and the things ended up disappearing after they shot him. And the fallout of the case is as interesting as the case itself. Researchers like Stan Gordon and a couple other people showed up a little bit later. Allegedly, the landing site where the UFO had been had ambient light that was bright enough to read a newspaper by for like a couple hours afterwards or something like that. But the primary witness, when he was, I can't remember if it was at the landing site or in the house, or between, one of those places, when the researchers were there, fell down and fell into this convulsive fit, and he claimed that he had seen this sort of apocalyptic vision with like this Grim Reaper figure as well. And then afterwards, again, the primary witness, but I don't want to make it sound like it was just him because, like, again, there were multiple people who had seen it, but primary witness claimed that he had some basically psi phenomena, precognitive dreams and visions. He anticipated an airplane crash, I think. He had been visited by a ghost. He was able to predict what branches birds would lay on, specifically enough. I think, I'm trying to remember back to the book, I think that he actually got rid of his glasses, too. I think his eyesight improved, if memory serves. That might be wrong. But he was visited by two people who he assumed were Air Force personnel, and they showed him clear, wonderful pictures of UFOs and Bigfoot, and they said that he, shouldn't really talk about what he saw, and they offered to hypnotize him, which is just not standard operating procedure. Wow. But he consented, and he never heard from them again. So exactly what they were, if they were literal government agents, or what I would lean towards, they were some sort of paranormal-ish Men in Black sort of manifestation. Who knows? But this is a case that was from Stan Gordon's case files, and it was in Pennsylvania, not I mean, same state as my co-author, Timothy Renner, lives in. And I'm really jealous that he lives in such a wild state. I went up and saw him a couple of years ago, and we were driving around, and he was like, yeah, so here's where they saw a leprechaun, and there's where they saw an albatwitch, and up there is where the UFO landing was in 1985, and this is where I took a case of someone who saw a Bigfoot crossing the road. It's a wild area, and all of Pennsylvania is. Yeah, I don't know what it is,
I grew up in Canton, Ohio. So,
okay.
Yeah, I did a lot of work over in that area of Pennsylvania where Stan Gordon is from, Kecksburg area, all that. Got to see the Kecksburg, UFO replica that's up and all kinds of neat stuff. But that Great Lakes area, man, it is just teeming with everything from Dogman to ghost stories to everything.
Tim is close to the Maryland line, but yeah, but just that whole area, the whole Ohio River Valley, I would say from, upstate New York down through Pennsylvania and over to Ohio, and, parts of Illinois, and that encompasses, West Virginia and all that stuff. It's just weird, And I have some ideas as maybe why that is, but, it's always funny you talk to people who are like, oh, well, Pennsylvania's weird because it's got so much granite. It's a granite state. I'm like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if, first somebody tells me that it's limestone, and then somebody tells me it's quartz, and then somebody tells me it's granite, and I guess it's all three now, and there's running water. And, I think there's a little bit of truth in all that, but I don't think there's one single reason why Pennsylvania or, even your part of Ohio is weird.
Yeah, growing up, we always heard stories that it was the Ohio River that made everything so weird because so much is centered around that river. But then we heard of, tales of Chief Cornstalk and all that weirdness. So, and that's even somehow mixed in with the Mothman phenomena and all that.
Yeah, I definitely have been leaning towards the idea that the sort of mound network system, ley lines, etc., this is all part of what we're seeing. All the ley lines are mostly a European thing. If you can draw lines between monuments and the old world, I think you can draw them in the new world. Some people have tried to varying degrees of success, but I think that's it. And to put it an even finer point on it, Peter Levenda described America as sort of a haunted house because you probably your backyard is probably where somebody's died. It's sort of the tragedy of every post-colonial nation, is that there was a people there that was forced out, and there are probably skeletons beneath your feet right now. So everybody's backyard is a mini Skinwalker Ranch.
Right. There's supposed to be one down here in the South, a Skinwalker type area. I interviewed a guy who wrote a book called The Meadow Project.
Yeah, that's a really cool book.
Yeah,
a really cool book.
So that's supposed to be, I think it's somewhere in between us somewhere, maybe up towards the mountains more, for me.
Yeah, we should talk about that.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean later we should talk about that.
Yeah. So getting back to weird Bigfoot. Why do you think that I have a feeling like you feel that the same way as I do, which is that so many researchers tend to dismiss claims of weirdness that go on during the Bigfoot phenomena. Why do you think that is?
For the same reason that ufologists do it. They're sitting at the geeks table in the lunchroom and they want to sit with the cool kids. And I kind of mean that dismissively, and I kind of don't. I understand an impulse, but it's, there's this great quote attributed to Steve Martin that writing about music is like tap dancing about architecture. And I kind of feel like the scientific method is just not the right tools that we need to be. We can make observations about the periphery of these phenomena, but the actual thing itself, I don't think is going to answer to anything that's even inclined to appear in a laboratory, because I think there really is some sort of, how would I put this? Some sort of meta narrative at play. I think that these things are in complete control of the situation. So you've got, cryptozoologists and ufologists beating their head against the walls trying to, measure burn marks in the ground and footprints, and the phenomena is elusive and has this paranormal aspect. But I think that a lot of ufologists and cryptozoologists want to turn to scientists, materialists, I guess would be a better term, and say, oh, we told you so. Look, you've been ridiculing us for so long. How dare you be so closed-minded? I'm meeting them halfway on that. Like, yeah, the establishment is closed-minded, but the reason that they're closed-minded is because they're locked into this materialist, physicalist paradigm. And the paradigm of the future that I am convinced is going to happen at some point is not materialism. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's idealism or it's some of these other philosophical constructs that have sprouted up. But it's going to be falsified at some point. I mean, you look at sort of the great psi work that's being done by Dean Radin and Rupert Sheldrake and Daryl Bem. Some really good stuff with laboratory controls, honestly. It's just a matter of time, I think. And if it was any other topic, we would already be embracing psi phenomena as a reality. It's just that, it's psi phenomena, so it sounds goofy, but there's been so much great work that's been done. So I really think that the pivot point that a lot of these people who are invested in materialist interpretations of these things, like UFOs being alien spaceships and Bigfoot being a big monkey, I think the pivot point that they need to make is to say, you know what, we're going to keep on working at this from an angle, and you guys can meet us eventually, as opposed to us trying to meet you now, So, double down on the psi thing. Double down on all these things. And, at the same time, I have to sympathize a lot more with the Bigfoot community than I do with the UFO community, because the Bigfoot evidence is just so darn good, and it points to a giant primate. Full stop, Yeah. You've got these footprints that are the best paranormal evidence that we have. Even though I'm a paranormal Bigfoot proponent right now, when somebody tells me they're interested in Bigfoot, I still press a copy of Jeff Meldrum's book into their hands because it's fantastic. Work showing mid-tarsal breaks and dermal ridges and, foots that exhibit, disparities in the footprints that a podiatrist would have to know to fake or correspond to like similar human populations, but always with these very specific characteristics. It all very much points to a giant primate, and it's great evidence. But the accounts themselves don't really point to that. The fact that we don't have a body doesn't point to that. So, the Bigfoot community finds themselves between a rock and a hard place because they have this great physical evidence to the extent of having, hair and scat, allegedly. But there still is no body. And I know all the typical, counterpoints. So people don't find bear carcasses that often. Yeah, but they have. Right. People don't find mountain lion carcasses. Yeah, but they have. But at the same time, I think what they need to really come to grips with is the fact that if you're dealing in this quasi in between real and imaginary sort of imaginal realm, a very sort of Carl Jung idea, then the non-physical can interact with the physical. I mean, people who say Bigfoot must be a physical flesh and blood ape because ghosts don't leave footprints. Those people just don't have a really good grasp on ghost hunting history, because one of the first things that people did when trying to find ghosts was to spread talcum powder on the floor and wait for footprints to manifest. Poltergeist slam doors. Psi phenomena is mental and it's immaterial, and it has manifestations in this reality. I think there's a real that points to the fact that there's what was it Valet said? The UFO points to an arbitrary duality in our perception of reality. I think the Bigfoot phenomena does the same thing. I just think that, and I might be wrong, right? I might be full of it, but at least have the conversation, because, right? Do we have to reach the 100-year mark of beating our heads against a wall trying to find a body, or should we get past the 50-year mark and say maybe we should try some other stuff in addition to these more traditional concepts?
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on so many things that I wanted to talk with you about just in that little bit of time that you were speaking there. So one of the things that bothers me the most about the flesh and blood hypothesis is, like you said, where's the body? First of all, where are the bodies? Second of all, if there's obviously a breeding population out there somewhere, if they are flesh and blood, so where could they possibly be hiding to do this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this sort of underscores something that Timothy and I, a conclusion that we reached a while back, is that if this is a real animal, then it takes top marks in like every category of being an animal. Like, it's the most novel animal on the planet Earth. Like, it can jump farther than the farthest recorded animals can jump. It can jump higher than the farthest recorded animals can jump. It has better camouflage than any other animal. It has glowing eyes, which are not seen in any life form, let alone, mammals. It can take a variety of shapes and sizes. Like, it's the best vocal mimic outside of maybe the lyrebird. It's like gold medalist in like 10 categories. Yeah. And that just doesn't seem likely to me, But at the same time, I believe a lot of these witnesses,
Right. Yeah. And on top of that, like, there are people that will say, well, you don't see mountain lions that often, or you don't see bears that often. But the problem is that a lot of these people that have seen Bigfoot, they tend to have other encounters with Bigfoot after seeing it the first time. Am I right about that?
Oh, well, I mean, I wouldn't. It depends. The people who say that it's a flesh and blood creature typically are the one-offs. The people who see it through their scope while they're hunting, or they see it cross the road, and I totally get it. You talk to people with longitudinal experiences, the people who are habituators in their property, the people that go to Bigfoot places over and over again where there's Bigfoot activity. That's when it gets strange. That's when and it's also when you get all this sort of attendant phenomena, People say, well, we have Bigfoots on the property and my house is haunted. I'm like, okay, dude, I don't know how you won the jackpot, but I don't have any of that. And the idea that you would experience these things separately just happen, to zero in on you, really does strain my threshold of believing that these things are unrelated. Same, it's in, again, ufology came around to this a long time ago. For a while, back in, like, I think the 70s and whatnot, it was sort of a derisive term to call someone a UFO repeater, right? Like, you didn't believe the people who had seen UFOs 10 times, right? You're a UFO repeater. And since then, they've the community has come around and said, oh, wait, actually, it looks like some people are encounter prone. And they are more predisposed to have these encounters over and over and over again. And to the extent that, they're saying, okay, well, UFO witnesses also have poltergeist phenomena, and they also sometimes report hauntings. And, even though the community hasn't really wrestled with that in the way that I think they should, they at least are acknowledging that it's part of these, series of modalities that people experience. And I think it's time Bigfoot, the Bigfoot community said the same thing about Bigfoot witnesses. Cryptozoology is a noble, not really profession, but a noble discipline. It does make wonderful discoveries of things, and so there are some cryptids who are a lot more likely, I think, to be flesh and blood creatures than others. Up until recently, I would have said that Bigfoot was one of those, but there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but there's something that's not as straightforward as we're told it is.
One of my favorite correlations that you put together in the book is the Geist phenomenon. Can we talk about that for a second?
So I wasn't the first person to make this connection, but it was the sort of thing that is definitely what I take for fodder from a lot of my books. You'll get a statement here, a sentence here, or a paragraph there in a book, and they'll say, hey, this is a really interesting correlation. Okay, moving on. And I'm like, no, let's dig into that. Let's make that a whole chapter. Let's make that a whole book. Some people had noticed that a lot of the stuff that people attribute to Bigfoot has a bearing, or has a resemblance, rather, to poltergeist phenomena. And a good way of illustrating this is my good friend Soraya Azkath over at Where Did the Road Go sort of exemplifies this thinking with, orbs of light, right? So, an orb of light in the sky is a UFO, an orb of light hanging around a stone circle in Ireland is a fairy, and an orb of light in your house is a haunted house, it's a ghost. It's context dependent. And the same thing can be said about a lot of these Class B reports that you find in Bigfoot reports. That's sort of the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Research Organization, Class B reports, which are people seeing and experiencing everything except for seeing an actual Bigfoot. And so we're talking about things being thrown, raps and knocks, wood knocks they call them, strange vocalizations, strange smells, footprints, all these different phenomena, and you put those inside a house, and it's a 1-for-1 comparison to poltergeist phenomena. There have even been some instances of people seeing Bigfoot outside, or Yowie in this case that I'm thinking of specifically, the Australian version of Bigfoot, having seen one on their property and having poltergeist phenomena inside the house. But yeah, it's all really context dependent, because you get a rock thrown outside at you, and it's Bigfoot. If you get a rock inside thrown at you, it's a poltergeist, right? Which, poltergeist or fairies or witches, all three have been attributed this phenomena of lithoboly, of throwing rocks. So you have that, and then you have the interesting fact that the two places where people report poltergeist phenomena are in houses, typically focused around an individual, perhaps as a manifestation of residual psychokinesis. Or you have poltergeist phenomena manifesting in seances, classic spiritualist seances. And I'll be damned, there are a couple of different accounts amongst spiritualists who have been in seances and have either manifested cavemen in furs or a big, hairy, half-man, half-ape creature in the seance, to say nothing of the fact that there are tons of hairy hands that reach out and grab people during seances as well. So it does... I'm not saying that they are the same phenomena, but there's a lot of similarities there that I think are really worth exploring. And just breathing some new life into these things and thinking about them in a different way, because we still don't have proof of these things.
Right. So what are some of the most common themes or common denominators that are associated with these weird Bigfoot cases?
Well, specifically the ones that correspond to poltergeist phenomena, or just in general weird Bigfoot?
Yeah, just in general, weird Bigfoot.
Well, you have all these things that really do smack of poltergeist phenomena that I mentioned, although some of them can be attributed to primate behavior. It's apes throw rocks, so no one's denying that. But there are all those things that we mentioned. You also have the balls of light that happen. You'll have things that are kind of like Bigfoot, but not. They're like half ape, quarter human, quarter goat, half ape, quarter human, quarter bat squatch, and sheep squatch, which have no antecedent in the fossil record, unlike something like Bigfoot, at least that's conceivable. You have the incidents of Bigfoot seen in proximity of UFOs, or literally in UFOs. You have the curious ability of Bigfoot to swim in an almost mermaid-like fashion. That's that found one account of some fishermen who claimed to have seen a skunk ape 25 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
You also have these strange vocalizations that are just like uncanny. Like people say that it's almost the exact same sound, and we're talking about forklifts and elephants and all sorts of crazy noises that these things can supposedly make. You'll have footprints that aren't just 5-toed, but anywhere from 2 to I think 11 toes or something like that. When we're always told that these are mutations or injuries or something, and that just if you look at any of these footprints, it doesn't make any sense. Very few of them look like they could be that. You will have trackways that are all of 1 foot, the left foot or the right foot. You'll have trackways that end in the middle of fields, and people will say, "Oh, the Bigfoot brushed out their footprints," or they tiptoed backwards through their tracks. And it's I don't know what to tell you. I think it's interesting that we don't have a body and that these tracks of footprints end in the middle of fields. I think that suggests that we're not dealing with something entirely of this planet.
Right.
And then you have all these resonances to older folklore as well. Witches, fairies, ghosts, archetypal women in white, which I'm still kind of mad at Tim because it's like the best chapter in both books. He made this a left of field connection that I never thought would ever yield anything, and it's been by far my favorite chapter in both books. So that's some of it. I'm trying to think of what else there is. You obviously have these smells, which I sort of covered in the Brimstone Deceit, but you have these overlaps with fairy folklore. You have some aspects of the Bigfoot gifting phenomena that look a lot more like folk magic interactions than they do interactions with a big animal. You have some aspects where hoaxing draws in Bigfoot in a George P. Hansen trickster in the paranormal sort of way, in case anybody's familiar with that work. The idea that something about encouraging the imagination with hoaxes actually draws the phenomena in and sort of helps, because we have expectations about how things should be. It's like the phenomena comes in and bridges the gap and says, "Oh no, it's like this." We make room for it in our worldview. There is the difficult issue of infrasound, which flesh and blood Bigfooters like to trot out for answers to literally all the things that I've explained, maybe with the exception of trackways, which is this idea that, Bigfoot can blast subsonic frequencies at people that will disorient them and make them have hallucinations or feel odd emotions. But yeah, that could be part of it. But it really is used as a catch-all, and it's really is speculative. So you have Bigfoot that seem to be able to place people into other states of consciousness. People who've lived their entire lives waiting to see Bigfoot, and they see one and they seize up, and they completely forget that they have their camera. Cases of Bigfoot and missing time. That classic UFO trope of like, it should have only taken me 15 minutes to get home, and I got home 4 hours later. What happened? And then they go back into hypnotic regression. They find out what happened. Well, there's missing time in Bigfoot reports, which I didn't know was a thing, but it's a thing, apparently. One of my favorite examples of this was Wes Germer of Sasquatch Chronicles was talking about his initial experience that got him interested in the subject. And he could have sworn that it was like 30 or 40 minutes because he and his brother were basically surrounded in their car by these things. And he said, we got down the mountain and it should have been like 30 or 40 minutes, but we were up there for 3 hours. And
wow.
The co-host that he had at the time was like, "Oh, well, when you're in dangerous situations, your sense of time speeds up." And I'm like, no, that's literally the opposite. Like, dude, you've never been in a car accident. That's actually like, that perception of time slowing down in terms of stress has actually been proven in laboratory conditions as well. So it does seem like that's straight up missing time.
Right.
You have, one of my other favorite things that people don't talk about that often is the unrousable sleeper motif, which is, you'll hear this in a lot of alien abduction stories, right? Like the abductee will wake up and the room's being filled with light, and if they can move, sometimes they're paralyzed, but if they can move, they'll be like trying to wake up their spouse, and the spouse is just dead to the world, completely asleep. And even though the aliens are coming in, there's this giant buzzing noise, and like sometimes they're hitting their spouse or any number of things. The spouse can't wake up. I found that exact same thing in fairy folklore of a mother waking in the middle of the night to see the fairies taking her baby off, and like she's trying to wake up her husband and her husband won't wake up. But again, I'll be damned if it doesn't appear in Bigfoot accounts, and not like even apocryphal accounts. We're talking about stuff that came from researchers, like firsthand. 2 examples I can think of. One was some researchers who were out like specifically looking for Bigfoot, and they rigged a perimeter around their camp that got set off in the middle of the night. And one of the researchers woke up, and he starts shaking and trying to wake up his partner. Couldn't wake him up. More profoundly, Doug Hajicek, who was one of the driving forces behind some of the best Monster Quest episodes, the Snellgrove Lake episodes, if you remember those.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they had like rocks thrown at the cabin while the crew was there. Camera crew was there. It was great. He had been up to that area a lot, and there was, a lot of Bigfoot activity in the area. I think there have been some sightings as well. Strange singing across the lake, which is another thing that you see in Bigfoot Encounters sometimes is the presence of music. But he claimed that one night, the building that they were overnighting in was just assaulted by slaps and things on the roof and rocks hitting the walls, and like he felt like the entire thing was going to be rocked off its foundation, and he's freaking out, and he goes and he's trying to wake up his son, and his son won't wake up, and he's trying to wake up the other researcher, and he literally says that like he feels like he's beating the researcher so hard that he's going to like hurt him, and the guy won't wake up, and then the activity stops, and it can be woken up again or whatever. That's for that motif to manifest in each of those situations, between UFOs and fairies and Bigfoot. That's just way too specific, man. It's way too specific.
Yeah, it is.
So you've got, that's another thing that I find fascinating. And you have the fact that a lot of the evidence disappears, which is, again, that idea that I talked about earlier, of there sort of being a meta-narrative at play. The idea that something is pulling the strings to make sure that the evidence never gets collected, to make sure that it always remains in this dubious, proven, unproven realm. You have Bigfoot who don't leave footprints where they should. You have Bigfoot who leave deeper footprints than they should. You have Bigfoot who seem to pass over terrain preternaturally smooth. You'll even find this in Flesh and Blood encounters, sightings rather, where they just glide over the terrain. It doesn't look like they're bobbing up and down at all. It's to the extent that it's been compared to a cross-country skier, just like gliding across in front of you. Bigfoot that phase through walls, which may be part of that phenomenon, right? Maybe they're describing the same thing. Bigfoot, that actually they're able to travel through thick brush without moving the brush at all, or able to more dramatically travel through fences, like phasing through the fences. And, again, these damn things are bulletproof, and there's an argument to be made about that, but none of those, I don't think, really hold up when you look at some of the surrounding facts. People will say, well, Bigfoot's skin is really thick. Well, if you look at every other primate, the skin is thinnest on areas that are covered in hair. Anybody who's, bumped their scalp and, and touched their head a couple minutes later can attest to that. I've done that before. I'm like, am I okay? Oh crap, I'm bleeding.
Yeah.
So that doesn't hold up. Oh, well, they have thick musculature like brown bears. Well, yeah, but brown bears still react when hit with things. Like you can, if you're a good enough shot and you know where to hit it, take down a brown bear with a handgun. It's been done before. And if you shoot a brown bear point blank in the face with birdshot, it's going to react in some manner. But you have these stories of people being, 30 yards away from Bigfoot with a high-powered rifle, and they're crack shots. They're great hunters. They're sure they hit the darn thing. And they shoot it, and it looks at them and it walks away. If it even looks at them, nothing on earth should do that. Something should make should react somehow. Especially something that isn't an elephant,
Yeah.
Yeah. There should be some sort of reaction, and you just don't get it. To say nothing of the fact that, people have this sort of mind speak phenomena, right? Sometimes they're told not to pull the trigger. Telepathy with Bigfoot, as it were. I just rambled for like 15 minutes.
No, I love it, man. Aren't there also animal mutilations that are correlated with Bigfoot as well?
Yeah, it's not something you see as commonly, but there is that cattle mutilation, or not. Cattle mutilations have been blamed on Bigfoot, let's put it that way. You don't have the sort of body of folklore that you do in fairy belief or in modern UFO belief, but there have been times when farmers have had cattle mutilations and they blame them on Bigfoot. To say nothing of the fact that, supposedly there are stories of farmers who have made it a habit of gifting Bigfoot with food, and then they're hospitalized so the Bigfoot doesn't get their food, and then, somebody else comes back to the farm and finds all the livestock slaughtered. Those are relatively dubious stories, but again, motivically, they're the same. Which is, where I find a lot of interest in this stuff. Like, I don't care if any one of these stories is the same, right? Like, I'm so agnostic about it. Like, I love these stories. I believe in all these people. But, like, to me, the strength of this is the fact that you'll have somebody in Casey, Iowa, talking about Bigfoot, and they'll be describing the exact same thing that you'll read out of a 16th century manuscript from, Portugal or something. And that's what I think is really interesting. That's what I think really points to the fact that we're dealing with something that has some sort of objective nature to it.
Yeah, I would agree. So let me throw you a curveball and ask you this. Maybe it's not a curveball for you. I don't know, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
So how do you feel about some of these cases of people going missing or vanishing in the forest, national parks, and things like that? Do you feel like that they're somehow linked to the Bigfoot phenomena, or?
I mean, I've got to say yes, but I mean that in a... So there was a podcast that me and Tim did called Bigfoot Lunch Club, and at the end they had this game where they named different creatures, and you had to say true or BS, right? And I kept on wanting to say true, but it was never true in terms of what everybody thinks it is, right? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
do you believe in chupacabra? Well, I mean, not in the way that people talk about it, but I fit it within this larger framework, and et cetera, So, if I have to say yes or no, I'm going to say yes to that, right? In the sense that I think that we're dealing with a lot of the same expressions of whatever this is, whether it was wearing the Bigfoot mask that day or the fairy mask that day, I can't tell you. But I've long said that the missing 411 stuff is a paranormal Rorschach test, right? And whatever you're interested in is what you're going to see, So if it's government conspiracies, it's government abducting people. Bigfoot, it's Bigfoot taking people, alien abductions, it's aliens. And, I realize the irony of that when I say that the missing 401 stuff compares most directly to fairy folklore, because I'm falling prey to that trap, right? Fairy folklore is my thing, so that's what I see in it. But a lot of the stuff that you do see, I think it's a better fit than a lot of things, because you'll see people with bright colors being taken. You'll see people being taken near boulder fields or running water. You'll see inclement weather, and none of those really should fit the Bigfoot idea that Bigfoot's taking people in the missing 411 cases. Shouldn't fit the alien idea, really. Aliens are just going to have people... aliens can control weather now, too. They only want to come after you if you're wearing, bright red or whatever. But you do find literally every one of those in fairy folklore. Fairies live in boulders and rivers and are offended by people in bright colors and take them and travel on storms, Of course, not that I even think that the fairy folklore is necessarily an accurate reading of it, but I think it's closer to describing the missing 411 stuff than any of the other modern mythologies that we have. Yes and no. Some cases are really compelling. I do think that whatever the Bigfoot is, whenever it's wearing that mask, I think that it can be rather antagonistic to people. I also think it can be kind to people. But there's that not wonderful story. Jeez, Josh. There's that story of was it Dennis Martin in the Smokies? Who went missing, and they sent the Green Berets in, and there was again another storm that was happening. But there was somebody in the vicinity who said that they saw what looked like a big bear running through the forest with something slung over its shoulder or under its arm. I can't remember which. That would look like a child. And bears don't do that. I mean, there's that video of the bear with 3 legs running around on 2 feet on the internet that we've all seen. But the odds of you seeing a bear like that and the odds of it carrying something are just astronomically low. So I think, in a sense. Which is why, whenever I'm talking about these things, I'm comfortable to call aliens when they're accompanied by that sort of body of folklore, and I'm comfortable calling fairies, and I'm comfortable calling, in this case, Bigfoot, if it's accompanied by all that sort of Bigfoot activity. But again, some of the stuff just doesn't fit. Tim talks about an experience he had where he, it's a longer story than I can remember or really care to share right now, but he was doing something with some sort of intelligence in the forest. He was playing what I call the chess match, or what he called the chess match, where he was leaving objects that would be rearranged in certain ways, both in conditions where someone shouldn't have been messing with it, or or it was too fast for them to have messed with it or something like that. In one instance, there was a leaf placed underneath a rock that he had left there, which doesn't happen unless someone or something picks it up. And at one point he remembers I think he heard some knocks, and he caught this whiff of this horrible smell, I believe, and he seized up with fear and he couldn't move. And he was like, okay, this is it. This is Bigfoot, right? And he said that he heard 3 gears click in place. The sound of 3 gears clicking. Click, click, click. And then all that dissipated. The fear went away. He was completely just back to where he was a minute before. Bigfoot, I don't know. But I'm going to call it Bigfoot because I don't have anything better to call it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's crazy.
Yeah, all the fun stuff happens to Tim.
I'm an Irish guy, so I grew up very interested in the fae and the fairy folklore and things like that. However, I have never, ever, you're going to laugh at me, and I've said this on the show before, I'm terrified of garden gnomes. They scare the living shit out of me, man. They're creepy, and I don't like them.
Yeah. Oh, so have you seen that video I think it's out of like Argentina?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's like one of the most unsettling videos I've seen because the way he's walking, like with this like sidesteppy kind of.
It's creepy, man. So let me tell you this story, and I've told this story on the show, but you're going to get a great laugh out of it.
All right.
So when I was living in Ohio, we had a nice big hot tub in the backyard, and I'm a late nighter, you know, and I went out one night, and I don't remember why it was so late, but it was about 1 a.m. Went out, and I'm like, I'm going to get in this damn hot tub. So I go open the hot tub up. Now, there was a chain link fence in between my yard and my neighbor's yard. And my neighbor lady, she was one of those people that she just, that's all she did was live for working on her yard. Well, back of her yard, there's a barn in clear sight. And next to her barn or her shed is a big garden gnome. And I always look at this damn garden gnome because I'm always like, you son of a bitch, you know, I don't like you. So this night I had my beer and I went out and I took the top off the tub and I looked over at the garden gnome and I did my you son of a bitch thought, you know. I got in the hot tub and I got about half my beer down and I heard this weird noise and I can't even explain the noise. It was almost like a sizzle noise. And I look up I looked exactly at that gnome. And it was gone, Josh. Gone. I was done. I didn't even put the top back on the hot tub. I was in the house with the door locked, man. I was done. Left my beer out there, left my phone out there. I was done.
That is horrifying.
It was scary, man. It was really scary.
Yeah, that's awful. So, man, I have so many thoughts. So first of all, that sort of sizzling thing is not entirely dissimilar to some of the sounds that are heard before abductions and Bigfoot encounters and near-death experiences and the like, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, it's like you'll normally hear it described as buzzing, but you'll hear like buzzing, whooshing, rushing sounds, like all this sort of thing. So there's that, and then like the fact that it was a garden gnome, a physical like garden gnome lawn ornament that disappeared. I think a lot of people would say that's goofy or silly, but like with the way that I think about things, it's almost like your belief was the important deciding factor.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I don't have any other explanation for it.
Yeah. And you see this, you kind of see this, people have a hard time talking about it when they're, sort of into the traditional ideas that Bigfoot's a monkey and UFOs are aliens, because it just doesn't really resonate with them. But I do think that there's something to belief and the power that we attribute to things. Greg Bishop has talked about it sort of being a co-creation hypothesis, which is like whatever this is, either one of two things. Like either it chooses something out of the wardrobe of your mind and it says, I think I'll wear the Sasquatch suit today. I think I'll wear the fairy suit today. Or, I think what Greg is more into is the idea that in sort of an almost Lovecraftian way, we see something that we can't comprehend and we graft our own expectations onto it. And that to me implies that our minds and our perceptions shape things a lot. So like it literally, like, for all I know, the thing came alive and ran away, or like your strong feelings towards it, disappointed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I don't know,
like
man.
You send it to the cornfield or something,
Yeah.
Twilight Zone style.
It was crazy. I've had tons of crazy things happen to me, throughout my life, and it's just another one of those things to add to my belt,
Yeah.
But I did have a Bigfoot encounter. Actually, I have a Bigfoot encounter about every week now, but I had one when I'm going to explain this. It'll all make sense in a minute. So when I first moved down here to South Carolina, where's the Bigfoot? Where's this? And, where's everything? Because I'm so used to being, I guess, immersed in this when I lived in Ohio. Well, down here, there isn't so much weirdness, I guess. There's a lot of ghost stories and a lot of things like that. But where I live, it isn't so much. There aren't so many of the cryptozoological, I guess, aspects that I'm used to. So I'm driving back from Savannah one day, and I make this trip about once or twice a month. And I am listening to a podcast, and there's this road. The road that I'm on turns to my right, and right around this turn, there's a guardrail, and then there's a big ditch. Out of the corner of my eye, I see this Bigfoot in this ditch, man, and I'm like, holy shit, it's a Bigfoot. I look, and it's one of them goddamn cutout things that people put right in that ditch.
Yeah.
And every time I seen that thing for about 3 months, Josh, I'm like, there's a Bigfoot. Oh my God. And then, so now I see it and I'm like, oh, there's that damn Bigfoot. But,
yeah. I feel you on that. Like I think it's just, I find it fascinating. And I've talked about this with some other people, but like, I don't know how old you are, but like, I remember like, even as a wee lad, I remember in the 90s, like you couldn't go anywhere without seeing that gray alien head, right? Like it was sort of like the avatar of the 90s. And now in, the 2020s, it's Bigfoot. Like you can't get away. Like you go out to pick up, groceries and you run into damn Bigfoot bumper stickers everywhere you go. Like it's nuts. But yeah, I do have kind of that feeling. I think it's happened to me too, where like I've seen somebody with a cutout, or because I think I know the exact one you're talking about, or there's we used to live ironically in Roswell, Georgia.
Oh, wow.
Because I write about stuff, so of course I lived in Roswell, and there were a couple little oddities in Roswell. But one of them was around the corner from where we live. There was a guy who had like this big chainsaw carved, like 9 foot tall Bigfoot statue. And I never stopped and asked the guy, like, how much would you be willing to part with that? Yeah.
Yeah, man, there's those little roadside things are really cool. Like there are a couple here in South Carolina. Like, have you ever seen the the UFO Welcoming Center up here?
Where is it?
Oh man, it's just before you get into Columbia, so it would be just to the east of Columbia. I forget the name of the town, but it's
okay. It's
just somebody constructed like a UFO at some point and called it the UFO Welcome Center, and I don't know. It's all decrepit now and falling apart, and people have tagged it but I guess it's a one of those roadside attractions that always shows up when you look at South Carolina.
I got to check it out because I think I'm going to be coming that way sometime in the next month.
Yeah, check it out. It's cool. I'll see if I remember where. I'll look it up and I'll send it to you for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be cool.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, hey Josh, I'm gonna let you go, man. I really appreciate you talking with me, and yeah, I do. Where can everybody find your books and everything else? And how can they contact you and all of that?
So my website is joshuacutchin.com, JOSHUACUTCHIN.com. Links to all my books are there, and where you can buy them. Unfortunately, Amazon sort of dominates where the footprint's in stuff because it's printed through Amazon, so you can just get that there. But if you can request it from your brick and mortar store, that's great, because I love bookstores and want to see them supported. Blog isn't great. I post something once every couple of months because I'm just so busy trying to move on to the next long form book or essay or whatever I'm working on. But there are a couple of genuine nuggets up there, and I do also keep fastidious account of all my podcast appearances. So if you want to listen to 100 hours of me, probably more at this point, but yeah.
I think I listened to about 50 hours of you these last couple of weeks. So
well, there you go then. You masochist. But yeah, I do keep track of all that. And some of them I have some more information about what we're discussing on each of those and who I'm appearing with and whatnot. So, yep, that's the website, and I have an author page on Facebook that, again, I'm horrifically negligent in keeping up to date, but maybe someday I'll actually keep it up to date. But writing to me, there's a contact form on my site. That's the best way to get a hold of me, actually. So
I really appreciate you coming on, Josh, and thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, that about does it for Dreamland tonight, dreamers. Thanks again for listening, and good night.